Hi, I'm Jennifer,
I'm Mike.
And I'm Andrea.
and we are
We're
not
not
saints,
saints.
but we're learning from him every day, and we are enjoying the journey of learning. I am. Anyway, pray, hope, and don't worry. Oh my gosh, those are words that I love to hear. Pray, hope, don't worry. And guess what? That is what Padre Pio is known for. Those words. And I must say, when Andrea suggested, let's do Padre Pio, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a little intimidated. I'm a little nervous, but pray, hope, and don't worry. It'll all come together. And it's come together a little bit for me, and I hope for all of us today, because I've always heard about Padre Pio, and I knew parts and pieces about his story, but getting into him more and more and more, it was just so wow. I'm having a lot of wow moments lately, and I never did watch the movie, and we need to watch the movie.
I haven't either. Maybe
I know.
before part 2.
Maybe before part 2, right? But what I loved is that the more I studied about him and learned about him, is you're right. He was very humble, but he had God in his life when he was born. I mean, from the time he was a child, and he played with his guardian angel, and he thought everyone else played with their guardian angel, which I love that. I want to play with my guardian angel now. But anyway, and he...
Maybe you are. I'm sitting next to you.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Oh, my gosh. Anyway, he was a humble Capuchin friar. And I don't know if you guys know this, but guess what came from the word Capuchin?
Cappuccino.
It did. Can you believe it? Did you know that? When I was reading, I'm like, oh my God, I love it. And the reason cappuccino came about was because the Capuchin friars, the colors of their hooded habits were the same as that of a cappuccino. So now every time you have a little cappuccino, you can think of Padre Pio. Now, let's go back to the man, Padre Pio. And another thing that I loved when I was studying about him is that on his first mass that he ever gave, an elder friar came up to him afterwards and said, "You may never become a great preacher. However, you can become a great confessor." And that's kind of what as we continued to learn about him, he was one of the best. I wish I could have had that opportunity to confess with him. I think it would have been amazing. But, I mean, he spent countless hours, 10 to 12 hours a day in confessions. People came from all over. But again, we're going to go talk more about him. And in today's world, when we all have the worries and the anxiety and we're carrying a cross we don't want to carry anymore, but that's our job. That's our responsibility. And I love the pray, hope, don't worry. It still resonates today. Pray, hope today, because we all have those worries. We all have those anxieties, and that's the way it is. So over the next 2 episodes, we are going to explore this fabulous saint. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you guys.
All right. Padre Pio was born in May 25th, 1887. So it's not really a long time ago. Like the last few saints we've done were born in the 2nd century or something. This is more modern, almost modern times. So it's nice because there's a lot more written history about him. There's more factual things. So there was a lot of research we found. At his birth, I found quite interesting. He was born in the embryonic sac. He came out, and at the time, they thought it either meant good or bad, which makes sense. Everybody's got different opinions.
Right.
So the nurse, when he was born, opened the embryonic sac, and he started crying. So he was fine, but that's a very unusual birth, apparently. I'd never heard of it.
Exactly.
Until I read this story about Padre Pio. And his name was Francisco Forgiani. Which,
done.
Yeah. I got to get Forgiani. Is that right, Andrea? Forgiano.
I'm not even going to say anymore because
Forgiano.
I want to avoid any issues with our pronunciations.
And like Jennifer had mentioned, he started seeing Jesus and Mary when he was 5 years old.
Yeah.
Or maybe before, but that's the first record that he had told that he remembered seeing Jesus and Mary. And like she'd said, he had a guardian angel that he played with, and he thought everybody saw Jesus all the time, and Mary, and had a guardian angel. And so unlike all the other children, he would be praying most of his time in his free time, and he prayed before he ate, and he took quite some time, and he'd pray for hours, a lot of times on his knees.
Yeah, even when he was working and the kids stopped and they had a break, he prayed.
He would pray before he ate a meal at a very young age. So he grew up that way. And he knew right away that he was going to dedicate his life to Jesus Christ. And
I think he did it at 5.
at 5, yeah. Yeah, and he talked to his guardian angel a lot, and he always encouraged people to send their guardian angels if they couldn't come to confession, to send their guardian angel, and their guardian angel would talk to him and give them what they needed to confess, and then it was like them being there.
And
So he always encouraged people to talk to their guardian angel.
and I think I've mentioned this before, but as a newbie Catholic, I didn't understand the guardian angel. And I'm like getting messages all the time. And now I'm finally remembering after these couple of years to talk to my guardian angel before Mass. And Padre Pio helped me remember that, because I don't know about Andrea. Do you talk to your guardian angel?
More so God, or I'll just say, Jesus, please help me take away this pain, or help me carry this.
Yeah.
But I think it's really interesting that, most kids are growing up, they're creating imaginary friends and they talk about them as such. I remember when I was a kid, my imaginary friends, and I had one named Billy and one named Sarah. And so maybe
had one named Eric. So I remember hers.
Well, maybe you guys, that was your guardian angel.
Yeah, we just didn't know it.
Yes.
Hasn't grasped it yet.
Exactly.
But he referred to them as these conversations with angels, which is really interesting because he's able to have these mystical experiences so early on, and that sometimes will take years for priests and nuns to kind of get to that point, or even saints or those who are following along on their own journey. But he claimed to see Jesus. He claimed to see the Virgin Mary and angels and his guardian angel while still being a child. And I think we could chalk it up to, kids say all types of crazy things, but he wasn't broadcasting it. These were things that were found out later on.
Yeah.
And he wanted to remain kind of humble about it.
Yeah, that was the story I was thinking of. When he was 8, his father took him to the church. That's where he went, and they were praying, and a lady came in that had a child that was deformed, and it was alive, but barely. And its face was all deformed, and its limbs were all bent and broken. And she went in crying, and she was weeping, and she was praying that she wanted her child to be healed. And when there was nothing happened, she threw the child at the feet of the statue, and the child's limbs straightened, its face straightened out, it stood up, started walking. And all the people in the church gasped and fell to their knees and were praying and weeping. And Padre Pio later wrote that, he didn't understand why everybody was taken by this, because it was just normal. God does miracles all the time, and he didn't understand why that was so special.
So beautiful.
But not everyone saw all the miracles that
what Jesus was doing in that healing.
Yeah,
he saw the whole thing.
Saw it and understood it.
Yeah.
And
I think 8 years old.
And I honestly think that that's why it's so important to kind of introduce children to their faith early on, so that they can have that experience of absorbing whatever you can, whether it's the values and the virtues, or the connection to Jesus, or some of the other benefits of learning about who Jesus's mother was, learning about some of the other saints or the priests and the different elements of the church, so that they can have or start to formulate their own understanding of their faith. And it seems like he was automatically connected, and he was able to just see things for what they were for him. And it's funny because as you go through life, you make friends and these connections to people. And in some ways, it's very helpful because you're socializing. You might learn how to see things in other people's perspectives, and friends are there to help and support you and to love you and to be your extended family pretty much. But on the other side of friendships, it could also be, polluting your mind with what they think you should believe in, or what they believe in themselves. Or if your friends make fun of something and say, oh, that's not real, you might start to believe it too, because of the peer pressure that comes along with friendships at times. So him having these experiences at such an early age allowed him to have that individual experience before his life becomes more, I would hate to say polluted, but filled with other people's way of thinking, and getting kind of in the way of that, very pure experience that he had.
Because, he had the opposite later with the devil.
Right. And so this was setting him up to solidify his faith before it was about to be severely challenged.
Correct.
And I think throughout his life, especially, keeping it, I'm going to try to stay early on before we get to his teen years. His devotion to Mary was very intense, and he would call the rosary a weapon for him to kind of combat the devil or combat some of these evil things that were getting in his life. But his devotion to Christ was more about the cross and suffering and being together in that suffering. Like, oh, it's not just Jesus that suffers, it's all of us. And when you suffer, you're unified to Jesus. And understanding some of these things so early on really helped prep and prepare him for his challenges to come later on.
Exactly. That is so well said. Yes.
And now, can we go to when he was 16 and
Yes.
the Capuchin, you said?
Capuchin. Drinking the cappuccino.
So at age 16, Francisco entered the Capuchin Franciscan monastery. And this was in 1903. Again, like the way we're getting closer and closer to today's day and age. It's great.
To our birthday. I mean, he was still alive when we were born.
Yours. Wait, what?
He died 2 years later. Yeah. 3 years. Yeah. Go on.
So whenever he was received into this order, they gave him the name Fra Pio. So that means Brother Pio, or Fratello means brother in Italian. But anyway, Fra Pio, in honor of Pope Pius I, and this is all according to the Capuchin tradition and what records they have of him. So this branch it's like a reform branch of the Franciscans, and they really believed in simplicity, poverty, prayer, preaching, and penitential life. There's a lot of P's, and they would wear their brown habits, and it became associated with Padre Pio because it reflected this spirituality and humility that came along with it, but also his sacrifice. And I think in the movie, that's how he is depicted with the brown habit and everything throughout most of the movie.
Cappuccino colored.
Yeah, and it's cappuccino colored.
Yes.
It's neutrals. Okay. So he becomes a priest in 1910 and became Padre Pio. So he starts out as Fra Pio and then Padre Pio. Did you guys want to say anything about Capuchins?
No.
Oh, okay.
You're all good.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to kind of say like what they were about and how neatly it fits within what Padre Pio kind of always stood for, and that humility and not really broadcasting all of his spiritual experiences, but just really trying to have a better connection to Christ. So
yeah, the only thing I might add is the majority of the young men that went there didn't stay very long because it was so strict and so difficult, and they weren't even allowed to talk to each other. I mean, you couldn't talk to anybody other than your spiritual leader.
Right.
The only person you could talk to. So there was and I think Padre Pio, that was difficult for him because he'd left his family, which was a great love of his too. He kind of had that battle between dedicating his life to God or dedicating his life to his family, which he both loved dearly. And that's a decision we all have to make in life at some point, I think.
Yeah, and I think there's a way to balance that and like follow something that you're passionate about. I know when it comes to being in a religious order, you do detach even more so from your family than you would if you were taking up a different job. But throughout our lives, I mean, our parents are preparing us to be able to live without them. And it's such a heartbreaking side of parenthood too, because it's your job to love this.
Watching your children move on and they don't need you anymore. That was a difficult thing to let go.
Right.
Yeah, they don't.
And you hope that you could hope that you prepare them for everything, but there's still going to be things that they need to learn on their own.
They've got to learn it.
So I think another added challenge that he had growing up and in his priesthood was actually himself.
Yes,
so
that is true.
With his health, he always was struggling with something, whether it's a fever or a respiratory problem or a mysterious illness. So many saints could be, I guess, remembered for similar things, like the little flower. We talked about how she kind of suffered bravely from her illnesses too. But Padre Pio was the same way. He's just trying to make it through the day, and he still would spend so long in confessions. He would still do his duties for the day and be with his fellow brothers
Yeah.
and fighting the good fight, but also fighting something internally, which is a lot of his illnesses and
And
being
a lot of art, I mean, with the devil. I mean, his nightmares and his fights and everything with the devil was
yeah,
so strong.
right.
Yeah.
And so I guess we would call that like the spiritual warfare. And I
Yes.
know Father Stephen, our priest, always says that. And he sometimes when we're going through something really difficult, he'll give us these big rosaries that are like they could be used as weapons. They're like
Yes.
they've got the big metal beads on them. And I think some of the other records of Padre Pio, there were witnesses that heard really loud crashes from his room and they heard
He,
kind of what sounded like he was fighting somebody.
Right.
But he
he
later told
got
them,
bruises and bleeding. I
Yeah,
mean, he
on
was,
his body.
yeah,
right. And he would tell them that the devil had appeared in
yeah.
different forms to tempt him or frighten him, or
And
sometimes, as you said, physically harm him. So the church, and I will say this, the church acknowledges that that was his experience because this is from his own private testimony. So he's writing this out.
Mhm.
But the church isn't saying you must believe this happened. They're saying this is what he reported and this is how it was described.
right.
So it's up to us to whether we want to believe that part or not. And I love to just be able to say that so that we're continuing to, I guess, remain informed about what was written and believed by all Catholics and what we can choose to believe or not believe. But where else would those bruises and harmful scars
Well,
have come
and
from?
he's writing his story, and he's not going to fabricate the stuff. His love for God and Jesus was too strong, and he was just telling the facts, right? Because he was so humble. I mean, he tried to keep his stigmata hidden for years. He didn't want
Right.
to know about it.
And
So
yeah, and it's like the fame that he wasn't really after, but it just was presented to him later because of the stigmata. And I guess, before we wrap up today's episode, do we want to kind of set the scene for the next
I think we should
part
because
two?
there's so much. I mean, his history and his love of Jesus and all of that before, right now that we know and we feel and all of that. And then, I mean, there's so much more, which we are going to talk about the stigmata, the bilocation, and how we could reach out during confession to actual people's souls. I mean, there's just so much about him
There's a lot of stuff later in his life with the World War I and stuff like that.
and with
But
the pilots.
the stigmata, we could just go basically. I know that he suffered pain from the stigmata wounds that were not visible for
Yeah.
many years. I think it was 8 years before they appeared visible.
And so that's in your hands, in your feet, in his side,
Yeah. He
Mhm.
had
in his head, right?
He had
Yeah.
great pain with that all the time. I think he was, like Andrea had said, he'd had a lot of illness. He'd lost a lot of weight. His mom was worried because he didn't eat, and he was diagnosed with tuberculosis at one
Mhm.
point.
Yeah.
So I think the pain from the stigmata was a lot of his problems. I mean, he had sleepless night and he had battles with demons almost nightly. They would come to him in the shape or figure of a dog breathing smoke with fire coming out of its eyes. Or I think one time the devil came to him at night as his father that was deceased and tried to convince him that he needed to leave Jesus Christ and follow the devil. Follow me. I'm
Yeah.
your father.
Mhm.
It was ever ending. But I think it was 1918 when the stigmatas actually appeared.
Right.
His hands started bleeding, his feet were bleeding, and he had a gash on his side that was an open wound that was bleeding constantly. And in the beginning, he kept them hidden. He wrapped them and pulled his sleeves down and covered his feet, and he kept bandages, and nobody knew of any of this for several years.
Except his spiritual director.
His spiritual director, I think there was a housemaid, a nurse or something that cleaned his bandages nightly because they were always all bloody. And eventually there was a leak that
I think the lady who was cleaning told someone and someone else knew. And then
they're like, well, what could that be? We want to see it. And then
Mhm.
started in this little poor town that they lived in. And then word spread. And pretty soon there was huge crowds outside wanting to see and touch this man with these wounds.
Mhm.
And that's kind of when it all started, that the church started like, wait a minute, let me see
Looking
what's
into
going on.
it. It was after mass when it appeared, it was after Mass at the friary in San Giovanni Rotondo, and he had reportedly seen a vision of Jesus. And when that experience ended, that's when the stigmata appeared for him.
Yeah.
So it
So
happened.
powerful.
You're praying.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So powerful. Well, did you find any Bible verses for us this week?
Sure. So we're ending on this cliffhanger, but we did touch on the stigmata, and I will say again, like the humility of Padre Pio, not wanting to shout it on the rooftops that, oh, look what happened to me and now I could finally suffer like Christ. I think that's what this Bible verse is kind of reminiscent of as a part of his character. In Galatians 2:20, it says, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. And I think it's fitting for Padre Pio. He obviously had a deep union with Christ, not just during the stigmata, but with the appearance of Jesus and then the stigmata following, but also growing up, his devotion to Christ and to Mary and to the church. And he wanted to share in Christ's passion. He wanted to suffer just like Christ suffered, and he was granted that. But instead of saying, look at me, he was more about showing how Christ lives in him by his actions and spreading the word about Jesus, not necessarily about his stigmata or the things that had happened to him, but sitting in confession, being with his brothers and joining his brothers in their efforts to pray, to fast, to be humble, all of the things that Jesus lived by, he wanted to live by too.
I know. And that's so beautiful and so well said and so true. And I said, I'm looking forward to going. It was hard to decide where to stop this episode and where to go on, because a lot more healing moments, a lot more miracles. Although I love the miracle of the lady who brought her baby to the church and Padre Pio watched the whole healing and no one else did and no one else got it,
Yeah.
And so he is so connected to God from the time he was so young. And it's in our day, kind of, that at least he can write it down. We have the true, everything that he did, we can read about. We can study him, which a lot of the saints have been passed down, right? The stories have been passed down, but by him sharing his words. And so next week, I'm excited to go more into the miracles, his bilocation, which I'd never heard of before. And what a powerful message. And I'm going to tell you one quick thing, which is kind of like on a side note. But before my son James died, I was really into reading about saints, learning about Mother Mary. And again, I was not Catholic yet, and I wasn't even thinking about becoming Catholic, but I was fascinated about the saints. And I remember before Mike and I left for Georgia, I opened my cabinet and I said, do I want to read about Padre Pio or do I want to really study Mary? And I chose the book on Mary, The Apparitions of Mary, which again, those who know my story and so on, Mother Mary called me home and my son did die in my arms. But Padre Pio was right there. And I'm so glad that I'm finally taking the time to delve into him, because he really is. His story is just amazing to me. And I also love the fact that he suffered so much. And suffering is what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Just like Jesus. And although that's hard to say and sometimes swallow and sometimes stomach, but he's such a great example of what suffering is, right? So I don't know. He's just today, as I said, he is as relevant today as he was 100 years ago. And I think too, we're going to learn more about, like for me, I'm going through anxiety right now. So that pray, hope, and don't worry.
Right.
And that's what I hope I can live that way. That's going to be my mantra this week until we meet again.
It's exciting in part two when we talk about his final years and leading up to his canonization. I think that will be really great to kind of wrap up some of the amazing miracles that took place while he was alive. But in a time where you're feeling anxiety, it also gives you hope. And that's what I turn to, either my Bible or going to Mass, whatever it is. If I'm walking into adoration or reading a book, like when I've said this before, when I read your first book, it was at a time where I was feeling a sense of hopelessness, and it gave me that hope. So hearing the stories about the saints, it's very similar to that, like just turning to something that is going to give you hope for the next day when you're facing times of anxiety or challenges, whatever it is. I think I'm in both right now. I'm in challenge mode and anxiety mode, so I can sit with you in that. But I think it'll be great, and I loved talking about him today too.
So pray, hope, and don't worry.
Don't worry
Yeah.
about a thing.
Every little thing's gonna be all right. All right. Well, thank you for joining us for episode 1 of Padre Pio. We look forward to seeing you next week. Until then, take care.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of We're Not Saints. For more of the We're Not Saints shenanigans and behind-the-scenes content, you can follow us on Instagram at We're Not Saints 1. That's We're Not Saints 1, without the apostrophe. And be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. We'd also love to hear from you. So leave us a comment or a review, or contact us by email at we'renotsaints1@gmail.com.
And if you'd like to have a great companion to your weekly saint studies with us, you can purchase a copy of my books. Are You There, Mary? How to Resurrect in Love After Loss, Finding Love in the Confessional, or When Vice Happens. Available as a Kindle version or paperback on Amazon.
All these links will be provided in the description of this episode. And don't forget to tune in next Wednesday for our weekly dose of saints. God bless you.
Should you read it again with more intonation?
No.
It was very Mike.